climax, to warn the family, to stem the flood. But the water rises inexorably. At the climax, the dreamer is either swept away or finds themselves floating in a new world, unrecognizable and empty. This is the dream of the empath at the breaking point, the rising tide of all that was unspoken, unfelt, denied. It is the psyche's way of signaling that the threshold has been crossed. When the empath finally snaps, it is never truly sudden. It is the result of years of accumulated neglect, not by the world, though the world plays its part, but by the empath's own refusal to acknowledge their shadow, their limits, their right to boundaries. The most dangerous empath, then, is not the one who is perpetually wounded, forever giving, but the one who at last sees the pattern for what it is, a sacrifice demanded not by love, but by fear. When the empath snaps, a new archetype emerges from the depths. No longer the silent healer, the empath becomes a force of reckoning, a carrier of truth that can no longer be denied. In this eruption, the empath's shadow bursts forth. Rage, grief, the cry for justice. The world is often shocked, for the eruption seems out of character, but in truth, it is the most authentic expression of the self that the empath has ever made. Here, let us pause and consider the myth of the volcano. For centuries, villagers live in the shadow of the mountain, cultivating its fertile slopes, drinking from its streams, building their lives upon the certainty of its stillness. The volcano, they say, is sleeping, but those who live closest know that the stillness is not peace but containment, and that the fire within has its own mysterious rhythm. When the eruption comes, it is both destruction and renewal. The old world is swept away, but the ashes make the soil richer for those who survive. The empath, who snaps, is like this volcano. The eruption is never without warning, if only one knows how to listen. The subtle tremors, the uneasy dreams, the moments of inexplicable sadness or anger, these are all omens of the coming transformation. Yet until the moment arrives, both the empath and those around them will do all they can to deny, to rationalize, to continue the old pattern. The danger lies not in the eruption itself, but in the refusal to prepare, to listen, to accept that every giving nature contains at its heart a hidden demand for recognition, for dignity, for justice. Let me draw you further into the heart of this archetype, into the realm where the personal merges with the collective, and where the empath's journey becomes the crucible for a new kind of consciousness. The empath is not simply an individual with heightened sensitivity. On the deepest level, the empath is a living symbol of the anima mundi, the world soul. They are the living bridges between the conscious mind and the unconscious, between the isolated ego and the collective psyche. The empath's pain is the pain of the world, and their healing is the promise that the world itself may be healed. Yet there is a price for this calling, and the price is often paid in silence. The empath absorbs the projections of others, becoming the screen upon which friends, lovers, family, and even strangers project their own disowned emotions, their shame, their helplessness, their rage. Over time, the empath's own sense of self becomes diffuse, scattered, lost among the voices that echo through their inner halls. Who am I, if not the one who listens? Who am I, if not the one who forgives, who carries, who endures? The answer, if it comes at all, is rarely gentle. It arrives in the form of crisis, of snapping, breaking, unraveling. The event may appear minor to the outside observer, a harsh word, a betrayal, a simple failure to be seen. But for the empath, it is as if the axis of the world has shifted. Suddenly, all the old roles collapse. The mask of endless giving shatters. What remains is raw, untamed, wild, a force that has been buried for too long. It is here, in this liminal space, that the opportunity for transformation arises. The snapping of the empath is not only a disaster, it is an initiation. The very energies that once threatened to destroy the empath are now the source of their power, if only they will claim them. The anger, the grief, the longing for justice, these are not signs of failure but of awakening. They are the voices of the shadow, calling the empath home to themselves, demanding a new order, a new way of being. This is not the work of a day, nor the result of a single insight. It is a process, a descent into the underworld of the soul, a confrontation with the monsters and allies that dwell in the unconscious. The empath must learn to see themselves not as a victim, nor as a saint, but as a whole being, capable of love and anger, of giving and receiving, of joy and sorrow. Only then can the empath return to the world not as a sacrificial lamb, but as a sovereign, a healer, who knows the limits of their own energy, and who demands the same dignity for themselves that they have always offered to others. We must remember that in every myth the hero descends into the underworld, not to remain there but to bring back the treasure that lies hidden in the darkness. For the empath, the snapping is not the end, but the beginning of the journey toward integration. The gift of the empath is not their endless capacity for suffering, but their willingness to face the darkness within themselves, to reclaim the lost fragments of their soul, and to become at last whole. If you have followed me thus far, you may begin to sense the outline of a greater truth that waits patiently at the edge of consciousness, as a mountain waits beneath the mist for the dawn. The path of the empath who has reached the breaking point is not merely personal. It is the drama of the archetypal self seeking wholeness. In the language of the psyche, the eruption of the repressed is always a summons to transformation. The snapping of the empath, with all its terror and liberation, is a mirror for the individuation journey itself. What is it then that the empath discovers in that moment of snapping? First, the illusion of separation dissolves. The empath, having spent years or even decades as the vessel for the pain of others, finally meets the disowned aspects of their own nature. The wall between I and thou, between the servant and the world, is breached. For some this manifests as anger, an eruption of righteous fire long denied. For others, it is sorrow, the tidal wave of grief for a lifetime of unspoken needs, broken promises, the endless deferral of one's own becoming. This is the crucifixion of the old self, the persona crafted with such care to please, to soothe, to remain needed and loved. The empath who snaps is confronted inescapably by the void beneath the role. And in this void, if they do not recoil in terror, if they do not rush to reassemble the mask, something extraordinary can begin. Out of the ashes of the sacrificed self, the possibility of authenticity emerges. In the myths of many cultures, the shattering of the old order is always the harbinger of a deeper wisdom. Consider the ancient symbol of the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. This is not a symbol of endless consumption, but of self-renewal. The old identity must die for the new to be born. For the empath, the snapping is the moment when the snake finally turns inward, confronting itself, digesting what has long been left unassimilated. Yet this process is rarely clean or dignified. It is more like a storm at sea, a wild and churning tempest in which all familiar landmarks disappear. The empath may find themselves weeping without knowing why, or filled with a rage that threatens to consume every relationship they have cultivated. There may be dreams of fire, of flood, of battles fought in strange lands. These are the psyche's images for the inner struggle, the conscious mind trying to make sense of the unconscious revolt. To those around the empath, this may seem like madness, but it is in fact the madness that precedes the birth of a new order. From a psychological perspective, the danger is not the eruption itself, but what follows. If the empath is shamed, pathologized, or coerced back into their old role by themselves or by others, the cycle will repeat with even greater violence. The lesson will become more severe, the suffering more acute. The way forward is not to repress the eruption, but to listen to it, to dialogue with the shadow, to welcome the monstrous visitor as a messenger from the depths. There is a recurring motif in the dreams of those who have finally reached the edge, the motif of the house in ruins, or the city overtaken by wilderness. This is the psyche's way of signaling that the old structures are no longer viable. What once provided safety and belonging has become a prison. The snapping of the empath is the psychic earthquake that levels the city, uproots the foundations, and demands a rebuilding on truer ground. But what, you may ask, is to be built in the aftermath? Here we touch the central mystery of individuation. The empath, released from bondage, stands at a crossroads. One path leads backward to the comfort of old suffering, the familiar patterns of self-erasure and people-pleasing. The other path winds forward into the unknown terrain of selfhood, dignity, and integrated power. This is not the power of dominance or control. but the subtle, radiant power of the self, the authority that comes from being aligned with the truth of one's own soul. To walk this path, the empath must reclaim their projections. For so long they have seen themselves as healers, helpers, martyrs, roles that while noble are incomplete. The snapping is the call to see oneself as both healer and wounded, both light-bearer and shadow wrestler. It is the recognition that to be whole is not to be free of pain, but to be free of falsehood. The empath must gather back the fragments of themselves that were scattered in service to others, to welcome back the orphaned emotions, the forbidden desires, the anger that was always a plea for respect. This is not the journey to be undertaken in isolation, though solitude is often its doorway. Just as the ancient initiates sought the wisdom of the oracle or the guidance of the wise elder, so too does the snapping empath require witnesses, souls who can hold space for the chaos, who do not flinch at the spectacle of the sacred fire. These may be therapists, friends, lovers, or even the silent presence of nature itself. What matters is not that the empath is fixed, but that they are seen, known, and accepted in the full spectrum of their humanity. In this way, the snapping becomes an initiation, a rite of passage into deeper life. It is an opportunity for the empath to move from the unconscious role of sacrifice to the conscious choice of authentic living. The wisdom that emerges is hard-won, paid for in tears and nights of despair, but it is unshakable. The empath who has survived their own eruption becomes a force in the world, a presence that cannot be manipulated, shamed, or used as a vessel for other people's pain. Here the mystical dimension of the empath's journey comes into focus. The snapping is not only a personal crisis, but a participation in the eternal pattern of death and rebirth. As the old self dies, so does the collective illusion that sensitivity is weakness, that love must always mean self-abandonment. The empath, standing in the ruins of their former life, can become a living testament to the resilience of the soul, a reminder that boundaries are not barriers to love, but the very conditions that make love possible. Let us pause for a moment and consider a recurring image from the world of dreams: the mirror. The mirror is in Jungian symbolism the interface between consciousness and unconsciousness. It reflects not only the face we show the world but the depths that lie behind our eyes. For the empath, the snapping is often experienced as a moment of finally seeing themselves not as they wish to be, but as they truly are, shadows and all. It is a revelation that is at once terrifying and liberating. The empath beholds the wounds they have carried, the anger they have denied, the power they have hidden, and recognizes perhaps for the first time that they are not only survivors, but creators. In the months and years that follow the snapping, the empath's life is forever changed. Relationships may fall away, careers may shift, old certainties dissolve. Is this the cost of truth? The world is not always kind to those who refuse to play the roles assigned to them, but the world also has a secret respect for those who have walked through fire and returned with their integrity intact. The dangerous empath, the one who has snapped and survived, is no longer a passive participant in their own story. They have become a conscious co-creator, shaping reality from the inside out, from the vantage point of the self. The snapping was never a punishment, but a calling. The violence of the eruption was the medicine the soul required, a radical rebalancing of the inner and outer worlds. The empath, now aware of their own depths, can offer true compassion, not as self-sacrifice, but as shared humanity. Their boundaries are no longer walls but thresholds, places where the sacred and the ordinary meet, where healing is possible, but not at the cost of the self. I invite you then to contemplate the deeper layers of your own story. Where have you played the role of the empath? Where have you been asked by others or by your own inner patterns to give more than you possess? Have you felt the tremors of your own snapping, the restless energy beneath the surface that longs for liberation? Do not turn away from this energy. It is the herald of your becoming, the guardian of your truth. The task, as always, is not to eradicate the darkness, but to befriend it. The snapping is the soul's demand for wholeness. To walk this path is to honor both your pain and your power. To become the author of your own myth rather than a character in someone else's dream. The world does not need more saints who vanish in the service of others, The world needs whole human beings. Empaths who have made peace with their shadow and who can love fiercely without surrendering themselves to the hunger of the collective. As you reflect upon these words, do not be afraid of your anger, your grief, your longing for justice. These are not signs of your failure as an empath, but of your awakening as a soul. Trust the process of dissolution, the sacred unraveling that precedes every true transformation. Remember, the volcano is dangerous not because it erupts, but because we refuse to heed its warnings. Listen to the rumblings within. Honor the voice that says enough. Stand in the fire of your own truth and discover in the ashes the beginnings of your real life. If you allow yourself to listen deeply to the words, but also to the resonance of your own inner world, you may sense the psychic alchemy at work. When the empath snaps, a veil is torn between worlds. It is a moment when the individual soul, so long dissolved in the needs and emotions of the collective, calls back its own self. This act, though outwardly marked by anger or sorrow, is in truth an act of profound remembrance. The psyche, like an ancient city buried beneath centuries of sediment, stirs and sends up signs of life, fragments of forgotten selfhood, old dreams, the glint of gold in the mud. I have witnessed, both in the consulting room and within my own inner landscapes, how such moments are seldom understood by those who have never felt the agony of overextension. Family, friends, even the empaths themselves may mistake the snapping as evidence of weakness or instability, but in the language of the unconscious, this rupture is the first labor pain of rebirth. The shadow surges upward, not to destroy, but to reintegrate what has been lost or denied. The empath, if they can endure the disorientation, stands at the threshold of a more authentic existence. Let us wander for a moment in the realm of symbols, for here, the unconscious speaks most clearly. Imagine, if you will, a forest at twilight, a landscape familiar yet unknown, where paths vanish and the trees seem to lean in with listening intent. The snapping empath enters this forest not as a conqueror, but as one called home. Each step is a descent into the underworld of the soul, a journey into the roots where pain and power intertwine. In dreams, this descent is often portrayed as a fall, a plunge into darkness, or a walk along a narrowing path, the way forward obscured by mist. It is here, among the tangled roots and hidden creatures, that the empath must confront the archetypes that have haunted them since childhood. The wounded healer who learned to mend others' wounds while neglecting their own. The self-sacrificer who measured worth in the currency of exhaustion. The child who listens, who was told often without words that their value depended upon being invisible, agreeable, absorbent as rain. These archetypes do not merely haunt the personal psyche, they are collective images, ancient patterns shaped by countless generations. They are living parts of the unconscious, autonomous, creative, and if denied, destructive. The empath snapping brings these figures into view, often for the first time. What follows is not a battle in the ordinary sense, but a negotiation, a recognition. The empath, standing amid the ruins of old defenses, may ask, "What do you want from me? What wisdom hides within your pain?" If they can bear to listen, answers will emerge, not in the voice of judgment, but of necessity. The wounded healer demands compassion for the self. The self-sacrificer reveals the craving for respect and reciprocal love. The child who listens pleads for the safety to speak their own truth.